Welcome back to Federal Insights, part of the Digital Modernization series. The topic of this week's discussion is managed services, sponsored by GDIT here on Federal News Network. My guest today is AJ McNamara, the Director of Managed Services at GDIT. I'm Tom Temin. And AJ, before had a break, we were talking about some examples of managed services. In one case, a state went to contract tracing for COVID. Another case, agencies turn over help desk to a company like GDIT, which gets to the question of how does an agency go about the decision process? What should they be thinking about when deciding what functions or what processes they would like to get out of doing themselves and get that outcome via a managed service? What are some of the decision trees that they have to go through?
Oftentimes, what we see is that a lot of opportunities for managed services come from cases where there's already some kind of outsourcing relationship, and that's not really providing the full end-to-end aspects of what that agency is expecting. And what we can do with providing this managed services really go back to, again, to the outcome that they're looking to achieve and make sure we're delivering to that complete set of outcomes rather than having them have to worry about, do I have enough labor here? Do I have enough hardware, software? It's really what do I need to do to get to that outcome? And what we often see to get along this journey is that we need to have access to data to understand what the opportunities are. And that's what we do with, a lot of times we do with our transitional kind of approach.
Yeah, so the implication there, this is not just a throw it over to GDIT and we'll see you next Friday. It's really a relationship that has to be ongoing because as a managed services provider, you do need access to assets that are the agencies. Is that correct?
Yeah, or oftentimes we're also providing assets in place of the agency, so they're not having to deal with managing these assets that are involved in delivering this service. But yeah, I mean, data transparency on both ways is definitely a foundational element.
Because yes, if you're handling the technology and it's your technology base, say for a help desk, nevertheless, it's their users, their IDs, their profiles, their network identities, and that kind of thing, which is in your hands. So that there's a high level of trust in this whole relationship. Correct?
Yeah, and we really look to aim to be in a true partnership with whomever we're working with.
All right. And how do you walk agencies through what those proper deliverables, those outcomes might be? Because again, they're used to operating something themselves and they have a different point of view than a vendor that may have 25 clients in industry and government doing the same thing. There could be metrics, there could be operational modes that the agency isn't even aware of, but you are. So does that come into play when planning all of this?
Yeah, absolutely. We really use our over 20 years of experience to, develop, like, what I would say are playbooks, to understand how we provide this. And fortunately, like you said, we deliver this across a wide range of different agencies and customers that helps us understand a wide range of perspectives that they have. Um, but it really ultimately comes back to the agency knowing itself well and being able to apply these best practices.
All right. And getting from the best practices to the outcomes to the details, that seems to be a transition point that's critical. In other words, the outcome might be, well, I want a network that's always up from the endpoint all the way to the data center. But that actually gets into very specific deliverables in terms of the WAN performance and the LAN performance and so on. And it could be different on Saturday night versus Monday morning and all of this kind of stuff. So how do you walk agencies through the translation of outcomes into details of what it is that should be in a service level agreement, such that again, there's some reasonableness to what they're paying for, what you're delivering, and they still get that top line outcome.
Yeah, like you said, service level agreements is really how we translate the outcomes, the metrics into what the needs are and how we deliver to them. And I think one challenge, I mean, you mentioned it, a common one is uptime for like the network. I think one challenge we see is, though, oftentimes these measures are outputs rather than outcomes. if we consider the case where there's a system that you use to file a financial report, and it must be done on one day each quarter, and that system is, let's say, available every day about that one day, that quarter, your availability metrics might look perfect, might pass, might be really great, but you failed in delivering that outcome, which was ensuring that that report was submitted on that day and making sure that system was available for that.
In other
And
words,
so that's what's really critical, is that we isolate what the outcomes are and measure those, not outputs.
yeah, so if the delivery date is Friday afternoon and you are open all the time and it goes down on Friday afternoon, then it looks good on the numbers, but it's not really the outcome.
Exactly.
All right. And this idea of prioritizing the first movers, you mentioned that perhaps it's where you already have a relationship that is using that transitional approach and building on that. Is that generally how you find agencies go about it?
Yeah, I mean, we generally see that we're able to apply our 20 plus years of experience to understand what are the first movers that are available. Oftentimes, some common first movers we see are service desk or security operations center as a service. Those are some examples we've talked about, in the past few minutes. But it's not always the case. It really comes back to the agency knowing itself and knowing what are their pain points, what are the areas where maybe there's not been the right level of investment in that might free them up to focus on some other areas.
I imagine the Security Operations Center, that's a tough one because you've got so much riding on what it does in terms of cybersecurity itself of the agency. And so what's a good approach to kind of that handoff? Because the agency knows its assets better than anyone in terms of where the vulnerabilities might be, what their CDM program, for example, is turning out. So that sounds like one where you really have to get deep in together before that handoff is made.
Well, I mean, I think that's true of all managed services. I mean, there's certainly ones that there's lesser extent to that, but it goes back to the data sharing, the true partnership that we need to have when we do take over a service like Security Operations Center. Um, we're often providing, like I was saying earlier, the tooling as well to do this. But one of the first steps we do is really a discovery of the current state, making sure the CMDB is up to date with the current information, and understanding where the current vulnerabilities are, doing a baseline of where the current state is. So, going back to service level agreements, if there's a service level agreement that says you'll be responding to and resolving security incidents within 1 hour, for example, and they're currently taking 5 hours, maybe that's not a realistic measure at first.
Sure. And I wanted to explore the idea of who the managed service provider comes in contact with. And we've talked about a couple of examples. In the case of help desk, it would be the agency employees to know that when they call the help desk, they're dealing with a contractor. In the case of the contact tracing for the state of Arkansas, in that case, you're dealing with the public, constituents, voters, and taxpayers that are may or may not know that they're dealing with a contractor. And so, what are some of the touch point human to human considerations agencies need to think of when they're going to put a contractor in place acting instead of a federal or a state employee?
To your point, exactly. I mean, we need to be really careful when we select personnel to support these roles and understand what are the government requirements for it. And that's a key aspect of the services we deliver, is really making sure that we're providing people who have the right level of skills, but also have the right kind of competency to handle these situations.
And we've talked about some specific services, help desk, security operations center, network, and even contact tracing. What other ones do you see as good potential, or what are people asking for as agencies move to this whole model of managed services? What's the next wave of types of services that you see demand for, or you should see demand for if they knew what they could get?
Yeah, I mean, I think the way we really look at it is we have kind of this two different views. One of them being, here's kind of our set of standard foundational set of services that support mainly IT aspects. And then the other way we look at this is really what are some of the more mission-specific services that we can partner with specific agencies to deliver? And that these are things that are going to be really dependent on those agency needs. So they're not things that we necessarily would be coming up with, but things that that agency would be coming up with and we'd be assisting to get to that outcome.
All right, there's a lot to think about. I want to thank today's guest, AJ McNamara, the Director of Managed Services at GDIT. Great to have you with us.
Thank you for having me.
I'm Tom Temin. You've been listening to Federal News Network. For more on this discussion, please visit federalnewsnetwork.com and search GDIT.